Snow drifted in slow, whispering spirals through the frozen forest, settling on shattered branches and half-buried shell casings. The world felt suspended, as if the land itself held its breath while distant thunder rolled from crumbling cities far beyond the tree-line. Humanity's war had narrowed to this final stand, and Earth, exhausted and cornered, had deployed only 2 defenders into the invaders' chosen landing zone. They stood side by side in the cold silence, their breath frosting the air, their resolve unmoving. The first was called the Reaper, a name earned rather than assigned. His armor, blackened and scarred by earlier battles, hummed with dim blue circuitry beneath plates designed for environments far harsher than the one around him. A skull-shaped mask hid his face, its glowing eyes a reminder of the surgical augmentations that sharpened his reflexes beyond natural human limits. He had once been a man defined by rules, hierarchy, and precision, but wars reshape people, and this one had carved him into something colder, something honed. Every motion he made was economical, every breath measured. Despite the layers of carbon, plating, and tactical systems, an unmistakable human tension pulsed beneath the surface, an awareness that this forest might become either a grave or a legend. Beside him stood the samurai, wrapped in lamellar armor that blended ancient craft with modern composites, each plate etched with subtle patterns worn smooth by years of refinement. Snow gathered along his shoulder guards and clung to the cloth that concealed the lower half of his face. He held a sheathed katana made of a rare alloy forged for this war, yet his posture suggested reverence rather than dependence on the blade. His movements were quiet, almost meditative, shaped by a discipline passed down through generations that believed valor was inseparable from purpose. Where the Reaper embodied engineered efficiency, the samurai radiated deliberate calm. Neither man spoke. They did not need to. The conflict binding them was etched deeply enough into both their histories that words would have been redundant. The Galactic hunters, 50,000 strong, had descended upon Earth like a tide of steel and bone, tearing through defenses that had taken decades to build. These creatures, bred for pursuit and eradication, believed the planet would fall within hours. Humanity had believed that too, until the Reaper and the samurai volunteered for what was essentially a death sentence. The decision was simple. If the hunters intended to break Earth, they would first need to pass through these 2. Footsteps crunched faintly somewhere ahead, too heavy to belong to wildlife. The Reaper shifted his rifle with practiced ease, scanning between the snow-laden trunks. The samurai's hand drifted to the hilt of his katana, his eyes narrowing, not with fear, but with recognition. Both sensed the shape of the approaching danger, felt the forest tilt subtly toward violence. Their enemy was drawing near, and the air seemed to tighten around them. A pale shimmer flickered between the trees. Hunter scouts, cloaked until moments ago, fanning out as they prepared to encircle their targets. The Reaper raised 2 fingers in silent signal, and the samurai responded with a slight nod, the kind born from mutual trust forged not through camaraderie, but through necessity. They were not friends. They were complementary forces, each filling the other's gaps. Snow settled thicker around their boots as the forest grew still once more. The Reaper exhaled, steady and precise. The samurai stepped forward, resolute and calm. Together, they braced for the first wave, knowing that survival was uncertain, but the chance to defy extinction lay directly ahead. They would not turn back. The first hunter broke through the veil of falling snow with a guttural hiss, its skeletal frame glinting beneath patches of organic armor. The Reaper reacted first, pivoting with calculated speed as he fired a controlled burst that struck the creature's throat. It collapsed without ceremony, vanishing into the white drifts. Yet its fall was not an end, but an invitation, and within seconds more shapes flickered into view. Lean, predatory forms moving with practiced unity. The hunters had found them. The Reaper steadied his rifle, fully aware that precision alone would not be enough to stem what approached. The samurai slid 1 foot back, grounding his stance as he drew his katana with a quiet rasp of metal. Though his weapon lacked the range of the Reaper's rifle, He carried it with the assurance of one who understood the significance of closing distance. His breath misted in slow pulses, each exhale a rehearsal of the discipline guiding his strikes. He had fought these creatures before and understood their habits. They attacked in coordinated bursts, relying not only on speed, but an instinctive synchronization that made them feel like a single organism rather than individuals. He watched their movements with calm intensity, mapping invisible patterns before they fully materialized. The Reaper fired again, shifting targets with machine-like timing. He moved along a fallen log to gain elevation, landing with balance that his enhancements made almost silent. Although his armor granted him power, it also carried weight that reminded him of the cost of every augmentation. He had surrendered pieces of himself to become the weapon Earth needed, and each battle forced him to reckon with how much humanity remained behind the mask. Still, doubt had no place here. Every squeeze of the trigger reaffirmed his purpose, stripping away hesitation as the rush of survival sharpened his focus. A hunter lunged at the samurai with blades extending from its forearms, but he pivoted fluidly, letting its momentum carry it past him. His sword flashed once, then twice, carving through joints the invaders wrongly assumed were protected. Snow fanned upward as the creature skidded to the ground, its torso severed cleanly. Another leapt from behind a trunk, but the samurai turned sharply and intercepted its descent. His blade clanged against its carapace, deflecting the strike before slicing through the exposed gap at its throat. Each movement was deliberate, driven by precision rather than fury. Yet even with their skills, the hunters pressed harder, sensing that these two humans posed an unexpected threat. The surrounding forest crackled with shifting weight as the creatures maneuvered into a wider encirclement. The Reaper recognized their intention instantly and adjusted his stance, firing to break their formation. He gritted his teeth as the recoil traveled up his arm. His weapon overheated quickly in the cold, and he could not rely on sustained fire. He signaled the samurai with a curt gesture, a silent request to prepare for a more aggressive tactic. The samurai responded without hesitation, stepping into a loose arc that would draw enemies toward him while opening a path for the Reaper to reposition. This unspoken coordination had developed over countless engagements, shaped by necessity rather than camaraderie. Despite their contrasting philosophies, neither questioned the other's decisions in the midst of battle. Trust, in their case, was a practical tool rather than an emotional bond. A sudden tremor vibrated through the ground, subtle enough to be mistaken for shifting ice, yet the Reaper's instincts flared. The samurai sensed it too, pausing just long enough to glance deeper into forest. The hunters abruptly retreated several steps, as though making space for something larger. A mechanical groan echoed through the trees, followed by the heavy cadence of metal striking earth. Whatever approached was no scout unit. The Reaper lowered his rifle slightly, feeling the weight of the moment settle over them. The samurai tightened his grip on his katana, the blade reflecting faint blue light from the Reaper's armor. Together, they braced for the arrival of a new adversary, knowing the first clash had only been a prelude to the true test ahead. The machine that emerged from the forest dwarfed every hunter that had come before it. Columns of steam curled from vents along its plated frame, and ember-like lights flickered beneath layers of armored mesh that resembled an exoskeleton stretched over a metallic giant. The Reaper stepped back instinctively, not out of fear but to widen his vantage. Every calculation running through his augmented mind suggested the same truth. This construct had been deployed specifically to eliminate them. The samurai inhaled slowly, centering himself as he assessed the rhythmic pulse of the machine's movements. It was not simply a weapon. It was a declaration, proof that the hunters recognized the threat they posed. The machine charged with startling speed, collapsing saplings under its weight. The Reaper dove aside as a blast of searing energy tore through the snow where he had stood. He rolled behind a boulder and braced his rifle against his shoulder, firing controlled shots at the joints of the advancing construct. Sparks erupted, but the machine did not slow. Its armor absorbed the impact like hailstones striking iron. The Reaper's mind raced, mapping weak points even as he felt the sting of frustration at his inability to penetrate its defenses. The samurai sprinted across the machine's periphery, his footsteps forming barely visible impressions in the snow. He aimed for the legs, slashing at pistons and hydraulic lines that hissed under each swing. His blade left shallow grooves, but failed to cripple its movement. The machine retaliated with a sweeping limb, forcing him to leap back to avoid being crushed. Although he moved with the grace of a seasoned warrior, he felt a flicker of uncertainty. This opponent demanded more than precision. It required adaptation. The Reaper found his opening when the machine rotated to track the samurai. He hurled an explosive charge beneath its torso and detonated it before the construct could compensate. The blast buckled part of its plating, revealing a thin channel of exposed components. He shouted a brief warning, and the samurai lunged immediately, thrusting his blade into the narrow breach. The metal shrieked as he forced the strike deeper, severing a critical conduit. The machine staggered, its limbs jerking erratically before it collapsed into the snow with a resounding crash. In the stillness that followed, the Reaper approached the downed construct, his breath forming slow clouds as the adrenaline receded. The samurai retrieved his blade, shaking off fragments of shattered plating. Neither spoke until a faint clicking sound emerged from the machine's underside. The Reaper knelt and uncovered a wounded hunter partially embedded in a control cavity. Its slit-pupiled eyes gleamed with a mixture of defiance and resignation. Rather than finish it immediately, the Reaper questioned it with terse precision, demanding the purpose behind the escalating attacks. The creature responded in broken human speech, revealing that Earth was not their final target, but a proving ground. The hunter's masters sought to measure resistance, to determine whether humanity should be subjugated or erased. The Reaper felt a cold certainty settle within him. This conflict was only the beginning. The samurai listened silently, his expression unreadable behind his cloth covering, yet his eyes betrayed a simmering resolve. He had fought countless battles, but the notion that Earth was being tested struck at something deeper than honor. It challenged the core of what he believed humanity represented. When the hunter's voice faded, the Reaper ended its life with a single, merciful shot. The samurai turned away, scanning the forest as though searching for clarity within the drifting snow. Their perspectives diverged sharply in the aftermath. The Reaper argued for retreating to reassess strategy, citing the overwhelming odds and the likelihood of more machines approaching. The samurai opposed hesitation, insisting the only path forward was direct confrontation with the command source guiding the hunters. His conviction rested not on pride, but on the belief that decisive action could fracture the enemy's cohesion. Their debate remained unspoken but palpable, a clash of ideals balanced only by necessity. Eventually, their stances converged on a shared objective: the crashed flagship deeper within the forest. It was the nexus of hunter coordination, and destroying it offered the only chance to disrupt the invasion. The Reaper's tactical mind began forming a plan, while the samurai committed to delivering whatever force was needed to see it through. As they advanced toward the looming silhouette of the distant wreckage, a new tremor rippled through the ground. Heavier, broader, unmistakably the march of a larger force. The hunters were mobilizing, and the forest ahead darkened with their approaching forms. The path to the command node would not just test their skill. It would test the limits of what two warriors could endure against an army. The forest trembled beneath the synchronized march of thousands, their footfalls rattling the brittle ice that crusted the earth. The Reaper and the samurai stood at the edge of a ravine overlooking the crashed flagship, its fractured hull half buried in snow and shattered stone. Smoke oozed from rents in its plating, rising in sluggish tendrils that blurred the silhouette of the horde forming below. The hunters were no longer stalking in small, agile bands. They had convened as a legion, gathering their full might to crush the two humans who had defied them longer than their statistics predicted. The Reaper evaluated firing angles while the samurai steadied his breaths, both men accepting that every inch they advanced would be contested by overwhelming force. The first wave surged up the ravine with animal momentum, claws scraping against ice, weapons raised. The Reaper opened fire without hesitation, each shot a precise interruption of their advance. His augmented vision tracked multiple targets, calculating lethal efficiency even as his armor registered several glancing hits. He forced himself to endure the strain. Every second he held the line granted the samurai the space he needed to move with precision. The battlefield vibrated as he shifted position, sliding behind outcroppings and firing bursts that cut through the thickest clusters. The samurai descended the slope with a controlled descent, his blade flashing like a shard of winter light. He wove between the hunters with disciplined intent, striking not from rage, but clarity. Each cut severed the unity of the creatures pressing around him, creating pockets of disruption that compounded the effect of the Reaper's ranged assault. His movements were slower than earlier battles. Fatigue tugged at his muscles, yet he concealed it beneath unwavering focus. Though the enemy numbers seemed inexhaustible, he fought as though every strike brought Earth one step closer to survival. The hunters adapted quickly, shifting tactics as they veered toward enclosing the Reaper. Sensing the encirclement, he vaulted across a boulder and landed atop a fallen tree for better leverage. But before he could reposition fully, a massive elite hunter burst from cover and slammed into him. The impact rattled his armor and sent him sprawling into the snow. He struggled to raise his weapon as the elite's serrated limb pinned his arm. Static flickered across his visor as its talons dug into his shoulder plating. He felt the pressure mounting, threatening to pierce deeper. The samurai saw the Reaper faltering and redirected instantly, carving a direct path through the tide of hunters. His blade met the elite's elongated spine with a powerful downward strike that forced it to reel back. The Reaper tore free and fired point-blank into its exposed chest. The elite collapsed between them with a heavy thud, its armor smoldering. But the cost was immediate. The samurai staggered after the exchange, blood seeping through a crack in his armor where a hunter's blade had grazed too deeply. He steadied himself with a stiff breath, refusing to relinquish his footing. They pressed forward together, inching toward the flagship. The Reaper placed an explosive charge into the breach point he had identified earlier. While he set the device, the samurai defended the narrowing entrance, deflecting attacks with dwindling strength. Hunters swarmed the threshold, driven by programming that demanded they protect the ship's core. The samurai held them back with sheer force of will, even as his knees buckled and his breaths grew ragged. The Reaper completed the sequence and pulled them away, just as the first chain reaction rippled through the ship's internal systems. A deep tremor surged outward, followed by cascading energy pulses that disrupted the hunter network. The creatures faltered mid-charge, their coordinated rhythm dissolving into scattered, confused motions. One by one, they retreated into the forest, no longer unified in their purpose. The Reaper and the samurai watched the legion withdraw, exhausted but upright, standing amid the drifting smoke and settling snow. The forest quieted at last. The Reaper lowered his rifle, feeling the weight of survival settle across his shoulders. The samurai sheathed his blade with slow reverence, acknowledging the cost of their victory. Though the hunters had been defeated here, the war beyond the forest remained uncertain. Still, they stepped forward together, ready to face whatever awaited them next, knowing the world endured because neither had yielded.